In this video, I'm going to be putting Iuno and Mortefi to the ultimate test to see if Iuno is worth it for you. I'll go over my findings from testing Mortefi versus Iuno with Jiyan and Augusta, with premium and more free-to-play weapon options. I'll test them in the Tower of Adversity and Whimpering Waste, and as a bonus, I'll test Main DPS Iuno with and without her SIG, and compare her premium team to Cardathia's premium team to see how good Main DPS Iuno actually is. So if you want to know if you want to get Iuno, let's get into the overview. So first, let's look at what each of them actually provides. Mortefi provides 38% heavy attack damage bonus to the DPS from Outro, 22.5% attack to the DPS from Moonlit Clouds, 12% damage bonus from the Heron Echo, and 20% attack to the team from his S6, though mainly the DPS, and a potential 10% attack from the Static Mist pistol. Iuno provides 50% heavy attack damage bonus to the DPS from Outro, so 12% more than Mortefi. She also provides sustain to your team and a lot more damage than he does. Another important thing is the echo sets they'll be using. Mortefi's best set is the Moonlit Clouds, as it gives an attack buff the next resonator, and his personal damage isn't much to be desired, while Iuno's personal damage is quite amazing, so she'll be using the 3-piece Crown of Valor and 2-piece arrow damage bonus, which should more than make up for the Moonlit Clouds buff. Though if you don't have the greatest second Crown of Valor set, or at least one as good as your Augusta's, then Moonlit Clouds could actually be a competitive option. In terms of testing for the Tower of Adversity, I chose to do 2 chambers, the first being the hardest chamber, which is chamber 4 of the middle tower, which has 2 whole bosses to clear in 2.5 minutes, and a neutral chamber being the left tower's chamber 4, which is multi-wave with the boss. As for Whimpering Waste, Infinite Torrents is the obvious choice, as it is the end game. I'll use the Plunderer's token as it is pretty useful and one that will always be available and doesn't necessarily favor one team over another, though it is slightly better for Iuno as she does do some healing, and that's kind of what procs its effect, but oh well. As for the weapons, I went with 3 different levels, being all 5-star weapons, a 5-star weapon on the main DPS, a 4-star weapon on the sub DPS, and the other way around, being a 4-star weapon on the main DPS and a 5-star weapon on the sub DPS. Iuno will use her signature weapon as her 5-star and the R1 Stonard Battle Pass weapon as her 4-star. For Mortefi, the most free-to-play pistol I have leveled is the Static Mist. I don't actually have a leveled 4-star pistol, since I went for the Static Mist as my first 5-star standard weapon on the standard weapon banner and got it quite a while ago. But luckily, it doesn't do all that much for his personal damage, relatively. It is a 5-star, but its effects aren't that great comparatively. And the R1 Stonard is worse than the Abyss Surge's standard 5-star weapon, and about in line with the top 4-star options, as it is only R1 with a low base attack and a pretty lackluster but relevant effect. And finally, Augusta and Jiyan will both use the Verdant Summer and Waning Redshift. But yeah, Iuno and Mortefi will still use the same R1 Stonard and Static Mist because that's as free to play as I can get, since those 2 weapons were pretty neglected at the beginning of the game. Sorry, I didn't really level anything else. Now that we got all that yap out of the way, let's look at the results and talk about it. So first, don't forget that Jiyan and Augusta are both DPSs, but they are of different elements and fit different roles. We're mostly looking at the differences in time between Iuno and Mortefi, and not so much Jiyan and Augusta. First, the hardest chamber, chamber 4 of the middle tower. This chamber has shield buffs towards Augusta and Iuno, so they will perform a bit better than normal. The dragon does have fusion res, so Mortefi's already poor personal damage is even worse here, and he would probably have cleared the 4-star weapon Augusta team, but anyways, luckily his job is to give a ton of buffs and not do damage. This is why Mortefi outperformed Iuno in one of the teams, since she was on a 4-star weapon and her personal damage was lowered, and Mortefi was able to outbuff her, albeit it was the same clear time and Iuno missed a crit, but that kind of feels like a win for him. In favorable conditions for Augusta and Iuno, Mortefi can get pretty close to Iuno if Iuno isn't doing enough damage to make up for her quote-unquote lack of buffs. Next, onto the Resident Tower, or left tower chamber 4, of 2 Phyrexis Executioners into a Hecate. This was honestly a pretty bad test, since Hecate moves around an insane amount, which makes it pretty hard for Augusta to stay close enough to him to land hits. Not to mention, it's always out of Shorekeeper's ult, so you're losing that buff too. So I suppose it is still useful, because I mean that can happen, but I think it's more useful in knowing that Augusta isn't really great against it. So I decided to test on the second chamber of the middle tower, since it also has relatively neutral buffs, though it did have arrow res reduced by 10% in favor of Iuno. The Century contract does fly at the beginning of the field time, so that can be pretty annoying depending on when you're in your rotation, but it's still pretty in line with Mortefi being a competitive option if Iuno isn't doing enough damage to justify being on the damage set. Onto Augusta Whimpering Waste, and then Jiyan Whimpering Waste. And this is still in line with Mortefi being a pretty close option to Iuno if she isn't doing enough damage. I didn't really feel the need to test more 4-star weapons here, since it's still pretty in line with the previous. Okay, finally onto Jiyan's teams in Whimpering Waste. Obviously I didn't really want to test him in the Tower of Adversity because I don't like chewing on glass. Sorry. Jiyan in single target is just painful. Anyways, since Jiyan's personal damage is already pretty low, since he was the first limited 5-star, he was power crept out of the Tower of Adversity pretty quickly. Luckily they added Whimpering Waste for him, but even so, his personal damage is still pretty low, so many of the new characters will still outperform him even if they have worse AoE than him. And as we can see here, Iuno really outshines Mortefi here, at least when Jiyan has a way to do more personal damage. The 3 lower clears are pretty close, but the 2 higher clears really set themselves apart, especially when Iuno is doing more personal damage. I did need to do Iuno's main DPS rotation though for these clears, since it allows her to have more field time to deal more damage. And yeah, she kind of needs to do that to make up for Jiyan's lack of damage, unfortunately. And as you can see, I did a clear with her normal sub DPS rotation like she would do with Augusta, and then I did another one with her main DPS rotation with Jiyan, and it was way better. So yeah, the longer you keep your sub DPS on the field with Jiyan, the better your clear points are. Unfortunate. Okay, well that's enough of that. Let's check out the DPS Iuno and see how she compares to Whimpering Away's Jiyan and Tower of Adversity Cardathia to see if it's worth making her your account's air DPS. First, in the Shield Chamber 4 of the middle tower, she has a pretty solid sub 2-minute clear, while about 20 seconds behind Augusta's best clear. Still not bad. A pretty rough clear if she doesn't have a 5-star weapon, and an even rougher clear if Chikona didn't have hers. Onto the second chamber of the middle tower. Yeah, so it turns out 30% def ignore is pretty good. Who knew? But yeah, I get that they should be pretty close because of that, but I was pretty surprised that they were as close as they were, you know, being the exact same. So I suppose it kind of just came down to the RNG of the clear, since her signature weapon should still be slightly better, even with the buffs in the chamber. Still pretty close to Cardathia though. But when things were in favor of Iuno, in the 4th chamber, she had a better clear than Cardathia. And in the left tower chamber 4, it was more Hecate RNG, and the enemies there already being pretty squishy, at least compared to the middle tower. It is what it is. And in Whimpering Away's, it was pretty similar to Jiyan's case, where she takes a lot of field time and you can get a pretty good clear. I didn't do any Cardathia clears for this, but I've obviously done it before, and these clears are pretty close to what she can get, honestly. But I do think it's still in Cardathia's favor here as well. Well, those are my results. I think they're about pretty much what I expected, and nothing was really out of place besides a couple of good RNG clears. Iuno should basically be always ahead of Mortefi and really outperform him when she is invested in, so make sure you give her some pretty good echoes. In the future, Mortefi can't really get that much better unless they release a pistol that can buff more than the static mist and maybe be more niche, but just build your Iuno for some damage and give her a bunch of energy regen and she should be pretty set. Whether or not it's enough to justify getting her will always be up to you, but if you ask me, I think it's enough, especially with how much more fun I have playing her than Mortefi. Sorry buddy, let me know if these differences are enough for you to want to get her or not, or you just want to get her because she's Iuno. And also let me know how I could improve on my testing. I already know I need to get some more 4-star weapons ready for some more fair testing at different levels of investment. But yeah, I hope this was all useful. I might make a Tower of Adversity guide for the new tower since they added the new chamber to the middle tower and it's quite a bit harder. So let me know if you're interested in that. And that's all I have for today. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for coming, friends. That's a wrap.